Good night for everyone. It is our interview number 10 with Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo. We are in a real long war period, and the people in Europe are getting more and more scared and are preparing for a cold winter because of the lack of gas and other fuels. Europe, this old continent, as its inhabitants call it, is starting to get the sickness of all the people. It is rambling and has forgotten, it seems, that it was the cause and the theater of 2 world wars that killed millions of people. In my early years in France, I used to hear artillery fire every first Wednesday of the month, reminding people of the horrors of the World War, so as not to fall into another war. Coming from a country that has lived through a long civil war, Lebanon, 1975-1990, I was very impressed, and I said to myself, this is a continent that at least keeps the memory of its misfortunes, so as not to repeat the same nonsense. But today, and with what is happening, it seems to me that this old continent has lost this memory. Still, the best thing we can do in such difficult times is to listen to a voice of wisdom, like that of Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo, so as not to lose our compass. Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo, before we start our interview, the Buddha lived in times of wars, and the other great sages too. My question, should we remain neutral in such a period, or what we do, or what should we do exactly?
Well, I mean, it's up to, this is not one of your questions. This is a huge subject. The Buddha himself, when 2 rival tribes were fighting over water, he brought them together and said, what is more precious, water or blood? And in that way managed to reconcile them. But later on, in fact, his own tribe of the Sakyas were decimated by another tribe, and he could do nothing to save them. I think that this is the thing, that you can't just, you know, war is something which kind of takes over like a flood. And it's very difficult for people to keep their sense of proportion and equanimity and compassion during these times. It's like they're just swept along. So what can I say? I think you know, if there is any way to create conciliation, then definitely one should try to do that. But as we've seen in the past, we don't learn from any of our mistakes, right? We just go straight ahead, filled with anger and revenge and you know, the desire to harm. It's like a horrible fire, you know, like a wildfire which burns up everything in its way, and it's very difficult to dampen that and put it out. What to say? I mean, in all our history, even the greatest masters have never been able to overcome this tremendous momentum and energy of aggression, which takes over people's minds. I don't know what the answer to that is, except to generate great compassion and send out in the place of paranoia and more hatred and fear, to send out as much love and compassion as possible. It's not going to stop it, but at least it's a light in the darkness. You know, what can you do? And to accept that we have made very, very negative karma in the past with all our wars and all our oppressions and all our like Europe going out to all these countries like South America and Australia and Africa and taking over and killing the people and destroying their culture. And that is very, very heavy karma, apart from the fact that they fight each other, right? And that heavy karma, which all these nations have created, is going to come back at them, right? They were planted many, many poisonous seeds. We're going to get a very poisonous harvest. And then with that, we then again propagate war and aggression, we're just creating more negative karma. So it just keeps like a cycle, just going on and on. We are receiving the results of past negativities and then implementing new negativities for the future. So, I don't know what the answer to that one is. We don't learn very quickly.
So this war, we can consider it's a back of karma, old karma, it's coming back?
Oh, well, there it is. I mean, the history of these countries from, a Buddhist or Hindu point of view, we are the results of the karma which we ourselves have created. And even countries can create very negative karmas, and then they're going to see the results of it. And if they don't say, okay, right now we're going to stop, but just go straight on again, repeating the same mistakes, the same aggression, the same anger, worse, because the weapons which we're using nowadays are even worse. In the old days, at least, they only had bows and arrows. Nowadays, the weapons that they use. And, basically the only people who gain are the armaments companies. Everybody else loses, even the aggressors. So, we're making horrible karma every moment.
Jetsumna, people of the Sangha, mostly they asked me, we should be neutral in this war, or we can take part, or what is the best to do as a spiritual people?
Well, I mean, what do they want to do? Go around killing more people? How will that help the situation? So to my mind, it's better to, be a voice for peace, for reconciliation, for ending this war, not for going out and, killing more people. What does that do? Well, I mean, what can they do, except to be a voice of reason, of rationality in the midst of all this madness? Otherwise, if you just get angry and want to kill more people thinking that's the solution, that's the seeds of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. And what I told in the beginning, that this continent, this old continent, Europe, it seemed not completely aware, it seemed lost the memory to World War, and after we re-engineer another and new war. It is.
Oh, that's it, isn't it? I mean, we just repeat the same patterns over and over and over. The solution to our problems is to fight. And however often we discover that actually that doesn't solve any problems at all. Yeah. And meantime, millions of people are being killed and injured, and the economy is destroyed. The only people who are really gaining, as I say, are the armaments, who have a big say in government. The armament makers, they love wars. That's just what they want. Use up as many weapons as possible, buy more. And people do. Because we are
even the
really-
leaders consider that by war they enter in the history, because all the great, they called the great men in the history, they were a man of war. Like
and who wrote the books? Who wrote the books, Lwiis?
Mm.
Well, these men who are mad about killing and mad about fighting. Oh, I'm such a big, brave man, you know? They're so stupid. History is full of the records of real stupidity, aggression, and brutish bullying.
Mm.
And those are the people that we honor. Isn't that pretty stupid?
Mm.
I mean, honestly and truthfully, human beings have got a lot to learn. And we're not learning it. That's the sad thing. So yes, be a voice for sanity. Be a voice for peace. Be a voice for kindness and compassion. Don't be a voice for more aggression and more hatred. I mean, that is a horrible thing. And we shouldn't add the fuel to the fire, you know?
Jetsumna, at the time of Buddha, it were so many wars were there. What it was?
Well, there's always wars. Men love to fight. Little boys fight each other. You know, I mean, that's how they interact with each other. It's by hitting each other. And then they grow up and they hit more, you know? I mean, we are not very intelligent as a race, really. I mean, it has to be said, we have not learned, as you said, after 2 world wars, you'd think we'd learned something. And after the Second World War, people thought they had learned something. But now, you know, 2 or 3 generations on, they've forgotten completely.
Yeah.
Everywhere, not just in Europe, but also in Asia, in Africa, in the Middle East, everywhere. You know, it's just, boys like to fight. It's mostly men. I mean, women also fight, but not so much. It's a very, something in their genes that just enjoy fighting each other. I don't know. And then thinking that if I can hit you harder than you hit me, that makes me superior. I mean, it really, if you look at it, it's really very stupid. But that's what we honor, right? You give it. If in the civil world, in ordinary peacetime, if you kill somebody, you're put in prison. Maybe you're even executed. It's the worst crime in the world. But during war, the more people you kill, the more big medals you'll get, and everybody will pat you on the back. And yet you're still just murdering another human being who, after the war is over, is probably going to be your ally. I mean, how stupid can we get? We never learn.
We'll start our regular questions, and this is the 3rd and last book of Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo that we will deal in this series of interviews. Comments on meditation, édition Le Relier, Paris, in France. First question, Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo, you say in this book, page 40, every time I thought of the Buddha, I had tears of devotion coming to my eyes. I loved the Buddha, and I wanted to be like him. Then, one day, I read about the Bodhisattvas and thought, this is what I want to be. My question, I have a personal question first. I had a similar experience. I was a child of about 10 years old when I heard about the Buddha for the first time. And I immediately read his life. And so impressed, I had tears in my eyes. And since then, I have read the biography of the Buddha more than 20 times. And each time I cried, so impressed while reading. Is it a feeling of an old previous life or what, according to you?
Well, it certainly could be so. you know, that you are recalling feelings of devotion that you had in past lives. But it also could be because the life of the Buddha is very exemplary for a spiritual life well lived, having been, you know, born as a prince, having all the sensual indulgences, and, you know, even to being married and having a child, a son. And so he had everything you could possibly want that the world tells you will make you really happy and satisfied. And he was not satisfied. He recognized that despite all that, there is birth, old age, sickness, and death. And however much sensual indulgence we may have, it will never overcome that. And this is common to everybody, how to overcome old age, sickness, death, especially in the spiritual sense of the word. And so then he renounced everything and he struggled and so forth. And then eventually he won through and became a Buddha. And then he taught so many people, and that teaching exists up until the present day. So that's like, what can I say? It's like a perfect example of the spiritual life, having all sensual indulgence, total renunciation, struggle, and then finally victory as you overcome all the opposition, internal and external, Mara with his armies, to conquer. This is the real battle, right? The real battle is the inner battle to overcome all our negativities and our anger and our fear and our lust, and finally be victorious. That's the true hero. That's the whole point, that he was the spiritual hero. And that hits something very deep inside us, that we know that that's the real battle, that we should be overcoming our negativities and victorious over the obstacles to seeing things how they truly are. So that's why we feel that sense of inner agreement and understanding that, yes, this is what life should really be all about. Not that you have to necessarily follow exactly how the Buddha did it, but that inner spiritual victory is speaks to us at a very deep level.
So, Jetsumna, we can say that we have always wars. If it is not an external wars, it is an internal wars with ourselves.
Well, you know, I mean, many of the Buddhist writers like Shantideva and so forth were themselves Kshatriyas. That means they were part of the warrior caste. They were aristocracy who were trained to be part of the warrior caste. So a lot of their imagery is about battling with the, you know, with our anger and our lust and fear and so forth. But actually, psychologically speaking, it's not necessarily to be in conflict and war with ourselves. That doesn't really work. But the imagery of overcoming our lower instincts and transforming them into the higher qualities of like compassion and love is something which runs through all the different streams of Buddhist thought.
But when we prove this devotion to Buddha just by our childhood, like what I told you, it is due to other lives. Why this devotion?
As I said, who knows? I don't know. I can't say what your past lives were. But if you felt an immediate affinity, as you say, and you've read his biography 20 times, which is a whole lot more than I've done, I would say that definitely is either that it's hitting a certain point inside you where you feel an affinity, a very strong affinity with this story. Or it could be when I was 9 years old, maybe 10, like you. I saw a program on television in which these explorers had gone to Thailand, because in those days Thailand was still very exotic, right? People didn't go there. So they went there and they were showing the frescoes in what now is Wat Po, a very famous temple in Bangkok. And it was frescoes of the life of the Buddha.
Mm.
And I said to my mother, who is the Buddha?
Mm.
And she said, well, he's some kind of Oriental god.
Mm.
And I said, no, he can't be a god because he has a life story like Jesus.
Mm.
So he must have been a person.
Mm.
Then I said to her, I'm a Buddhist.
Mm.
And she said, oh, yes. So then who is the Buddha?
Mm.
And I said, I can't remember.
Mm.
And I knew who the Buddha was, but it was, I couldn't bring it forward. I couldn't remember, but I knew in my heart that I had that affinity with the Buddha, that I was a Buddhist. I just couldn't remember who the Buddha was. So like that, I mean, certainly we could have past life recalls. So when you see the life of Buddha again, you feel an affinity with it because previously it had been very familiar to you.
Mm.
Who knows?
Jitsumna, in the same question and context,
Mm.
is following the path for others, what you are telling about, which you mentioned. The same principle, is it the same principle found in the gospel, which speak on those who are baptized for the dead people?
I never heard about that before. It sounds to me maybe being baptized for the dead means like taking baptism on behalf of your ancestors, like the Chinese. The Chinese have rituals for their ancestors to gain merit and help them in the afterlife. Maybe that's what it's meaning. That is not what I meant. I was talking about the Bodhisattva vow, which means the aspiration to attain enlightenment in order to liberate all other beings throughout time and space, right? So the vow to be reborn again and again in samsara until samsara is emptied. I mean, there's a very famous verse of Shantideva, which says, for as long as space endures and for as long as living beings remain, however long in the future, until then, I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. So it's that vow that from now until samsara is emptied, we will return again and again in order to liberate and help all sentient beings. So it's this vast vow, not for just our ancestors, except insofar as all beings at some point have been related to us, So in one level, all beings are our ancestors, right? Because we have been reborn again and again and again in many different families at many different times. So maybe on one level, we have all been related to each other. We just don't remember anymore. But anyway, whatever, we are going to, for the future, make the vow to come back again and again and again, endlessly, in order to help other beings.
But Jetsumna, our good actions has some positive impacts on our ancestors, dead ancestors?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, if you did, but who knows where your ancestors are? The Chinese are very attached to their ancestors. So they have the ashes of their ancestors in special rooms in temples. And then the monks do pujas for helping them. But from actually a strictly Buddhist point of view, those ancestors have gotten reborn, who knows where. They're not hanging around in ancestor, realm. They have moved on. They have gotten reborn, who knows in what level or what country or in what form. So in that case, it's not really, I mean, they're not our ancestors anymore. They have gone on to other relationships with other people. But the Chinese, because of their relationship with Confucianism, Confucius was very into respecting and supporting your ancestors. So their belief is that what merit we make can be dedicated to help the ancestors, wherever they may be nowadays. And maybe it's true, who knows? I'm not saying it's not true. And certainly this is a very important part. You know, in China, Confucianism and Buddhism and Taoism got very intermixed.
Yes. Okay. Jetsumna, my question number 2 on the functioning of the mind. You testify about your life in the Hermitage in page 17. You said the experience of solitude was very gratifying. In addition to the practical things, I understood how my mind worked. My question, does it need a life of solitude to arrive at this all-important understanding? And is it the same functioning of the mind in all people?
Well, the problem is that in our ordinary everyday life, you know, so many things are happening. And so the mind is often very distracted, and it's much more difficult just to sit back and watch the mind and see how it works, right? Because we are so caught up in our thinking process. But when we're in retreat, or even when we have a certain time every day to do some formal practice, then there is the space and the opportunity, right, to focus on the thoughts. And the idea is to recognize that we are not our thoughts and feelings. Normally, we identify totally with what we think, and we believe what we think is true because that's what we think. If we develop the ability just to be aware and witness the thoughts rather than being swept along by the thoughts, then we begin to understand how one thought leads to another thought, leads to another thought. But none of this is me, none of this is mine, because there's the ability to observe, which is different from the thoughts and feelings, right? If we were all our thoughts and feelings, we wouldn't be able to observe it, like the eye cannot see itself. Right? So therefore we become the witness to our mental stream. We're not swept along by the mental stream. But actually all people, and probably all animals also, you know, have a mental activity, right? And the problem is only that we are normally just swept along by our thoughts and feelings, and we don't have any space in the mind to observe that this is just thoughts and feelings. This is not something which is necessarily real and true. So the point of having a retreat, or the point of having a daily practice, is it gives us this opportunity not to be distracted by the senses, but to be able to simply apply oneself to observing the movement of the mind.
Jetsumna, when we are observing our thoughts, it means that we observe our mind itself?
Well, we observe the mind, the consciousness has many levels. And like an ocean, you know, you have the waves on the top. And mostly when you look at the ocean, all we see is the waves, right? The waves going up and down. And that's what we identify with, right? So mostly we only are conscious of the gross level of the mind, which is our thoughts and feelings and the undercurrents. We are not aware of any deeper ability to have retreats or to have a time every day just to sit quietly and look inside. Is when we begin to discover how our consciousness actually works. Because normally we don't even ask, what is a thought? Right? We swim like a fish in an ocean of thinking, but we never even ask ourselves, what is a thought? Where does it come from? What does it look like? Where does it go to? We don't even look. And we believe it. That's the problem. We're all these wars, right? It's because everybody has some ideas and ideology, and they think, I am thinking this, therefore it must be true.
Jetsumna, question number 3, about the mind too. You go on to advise in page 18, you said, we need to understand our own limitations and have compassion for ourselves. So we also need to learn to use our mind as an ally and to do the practices with joy. My question, many times we actually feel that our mind is our enemy. It is resistant to meditative practices and insists on keeping its old bad habits. And in a word, we don't master it. So how can we make it our ally if we don't master it?
Well, it's like anything. It takes practice, doesn't it? I mean, the Buddha said, let the wise man tame his mind. A well-tamed mind brings happiness, right? So we have to gradually learn how to become the master of our mind rather than the slave. But it's a, you know, slowly. This is what meditation and the practice of mindfulness is all about, right? We have to slowly learn how to understand the mind, how to calm the mind, how to make the mind more clear. It doesn't happen like with any skill. It takes time to master that skill. So what to speak of mastering our mind, which is full of bad habits, right? But we can do it. And usually it is recommended to start with observing the breath, because just knowing the breath can already help to calm and clarify the mind. But slowly, right? We have to develop our attention. As we develop our attention, the mind begins to quieten down. Eventually, you know, in the beginning, it may seem even more wild. It's not really more wild. It's just we are now more conscious of how absolutely out of control our mind actually is. Most people don't realize that. They think they're in control. It's only when they sit and try to focus on the breath that they realize we're not in control at all. We all have this mad monkey mind, right? And so then in the beginning, it's good to keep the sessions quite short, maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but really try to give our attention to what we are doing. And if it goes away, to bring it back again and again and again, you know? And we have to recognize that our mind is not the enemy, right? It's really, we can make friends with ourselves. The Buddha said we should give ourselves compassion and loving kindness and make our thinking our ally, not our enemy. And when we tell ourselves negative things, to recognize that we are just telling ourselves these negative things. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. It's just what we're telling ourselves, right? So gradually, as we begin to get a more quiet, calm, and clear mind, the mind itself becomes our ally, you know. But as the Buddha said, drop by drop, the water jar is filled, right? It's slowly with patience and perseverance. It's not going to happen overnight because we're so used to letting the mind run all over the place. And it's hard for the mind to accept that it needs to be tamed and trained.
Jitsumne, you are just telling that our mind is full of habits. And we said in psychology, habit is in second nature. So how we can change these habits?
Well, the good thing, truly the good thing, Professor, is that neuroscience now is showing us how our neural pathways in the brain, which create the habits, can be changed quite quickly, surprisingly. And by doing the opposite of what we would normally want to do, you know, we make a different pathway. For example, if somebody annoys us and we get angry, then if we make a conscious decision that rather than being angry, we will cultivate patience and forbearance, then if we keep doing that, we create a whole different pathway, which is not that of anger. We find when somebody annoys us, we are not angry. We actually feel quite tolerant and give them loving kindness. We can create new habits And they have discovered that even if we're really very old, we can still, the brain is actually still very plastic and can transform. But we have to do it, right? Our habits are just something we've done again and again and again and again and again. So that's the way the energy will go up that pathway, because it's a 6-lane highway. But if we go in another direction, then gradually we create a new pathway, and then the old pathway gets overgrown and is no longer usable. I mean, that's the point, is that we have to take one habit and decide this is not a good habit. I'm smoking, this is not a good habit. I'm going to stop smoking, or whatever the habit may be. And we focus on doing the opposite of what we normally would want to do, which would be to reach for a cigarette. No, I'm not going to do that. And then gradually it becomes second nature again. You know, that we stop doing the old bad habit and cultivate the better habit. And with the mind, likewise, we can train ourselves. We can. But like training an animal, you have to do it again and again and again until it just becomes habitual.
But if the Buddha told, according to what you are just telling, that it is drop by drop, so it is a very long procedure, no?
No. You know, they did this what you know, when they test people. They got this group of people. What?
Experiment.
Well, an experiment, okay. They got this group of people, just not meditators, just ordinary people off the street. And they, you know, they wired them up, because they're neuroscientists, and they showed them very distressing video clips. And the part of the brain which has to do with anger and you know, frustration, fear, all these things lit up like anything. Then they got these people to practice loving kindness meditation, where you wish all beings may be well and happy. And they did that not for very long, just a few weeks, a little bit every day. Then they showed these people, again, wiring them up, again, very explicit video clips. And they were amazed that instead of the anger and fear and aggression lighting up, the other part of the brain to do with compassion and loving kindness lit up. So within a very short time, they had rewired their whole response to, you know, to things which normally would make them angry and aggressive. Now it just invoked loving kindness and compassion. And these were just ordinary people, not, you know, sort of, you know, record-breaking meditators. So it's actually very, if we keep at it, within 1 month, it said that we can change our habits. But we have to be persistent, right?
My question number 4, in speaking of meditative practice, you advise in page 22-23, you said, we must dissolve the barrier between subject and object. You know, in other words, we must become the meditation. Once we become that meditation, the results come immediately as the mind merges into its object. If we keep the mind separate from the practice, they will never come together, no matter how much time we spend on it. And my question, but can this unity between subject and object be achieved before complete realization, and how?
Yes, because actually this is just very simple shamatha or calm abiding meditation. It's just a sign of concentration, right? It's not realization. It's just a sign of concentration, which is based upon the developing of the awareness of the object. So when the subject and the object merge and we become the meditation, then for example, people focusing on the breath, they feel they are the breath. with no division between the breath and the breather. You know, at that moment, because of our concentration, we become one with the object of our concentration and our attention. So this is not realization. This is just simply allowing the consciousness to rest within itself. It's concentration. Someone who is like an artist or a potter or anybody who is applying concentration, often that happens. They find that they have become what the action that they are doing, because their mind and whatever it is they're concentrating on merge together. It's not like I am doing this, but there is just the doing. So it's not a very it's very useful to develop concentration in this way, but in itself it's not actually realization. It's just having very clear attention, so that the object and the actor and the action become one.
Okay. Jitsumna, question number 5, concerning the choice of a guru. You teach the following, page 39. In the Vajrayana texts, it is said that you should examine your teacher, or rather your potential teacher, up to 12 years before accepting him or her. Again, in guru is not for one life, he is for all lives. And my question, isn't 12 years a long time? And how can a guru be for all lives? Can the memory of his teaching be transmitted from one life to another life?
Well, I mean, first of all, of course, the text stating up to 12 years is simply advising us not to accept a guru lightly, right? But really examine carefully, because our commitment is not just for this life, right? If we have a real heart guru, then the understanding is that we will meet with that same guru again and again in all our lifetimes until enlightenment is reached. So therefore, it's very important that we choose carefully. We don't just go for the first charismatic teacher we meet, but that we are careful, cautious, you know, until we finally really deeply trust them and therefore commit to them. Because, as I say, it's not just for this lifetime. The understanding is that this is a guru for all our lifetimes, and often that we have met again someone that we knew in the past.
Okay. Jitsumna, question number 6. Speaking of the need for diligence in practice, you say in page 40, someone once asked a very loving Lama called Jamgon Kongrutul for advice on practice. He replied, do it. Well, my question, this is often the case of most of us. We ask questions about our practice much more than we practice. Is it just laziness in us, according to you?
Well, basically, yes, it is, I think, laziness. So even when we make ourselves busy in other directions, that is also a form of spiritual laziness, right? So according to Buddhism, laziness is 3 types. One is the gross laziness. You know, we should get up in the morning to practice, but, well, maybe another half hour in bed and we turn around and go back to sleep. That's very obvious laziness, right? But there's also the laziness of low self-esteem, when we tell ourselves, I can't do this. Everybody else can sit beautifully in samadhi and they're all very concentrated. Me, when I sit, just my legs hurt and my mind is mad and thinking too many thoughts, and I can't do this. It's because I'm not capable. Other people are great practitioners, but me, I'll never get anywhere. So then we don't try, right? We give up. And we feel I'm justified because obviously I'm not a meditator. Like if you sit down at a piano and you hit all the wrong notes and you tell yourself, well, clearly I'm not musical, then, you know, that's it. You've given up, right? And then you feel justified instead of just saying, well, other people can play this instrument. So can I if I keep practicing hard enough. So that's also laziness, to tell ourselves we can't do it because we're not capable. And the third kind of laziness is that of being too busy. Even if you're busy doing what looks like very spiritual things, running a Dharma center or something, it's an excuse not to sit down because I'm helping all these other people and I'm doing all this wonderful work for helping the homeless, or you're working in a hospital or whatever. And that's very good, but it can also act as an avoidance of, you're breathing out, but you're not breathing in. And you're putting off doing any genuine spiritual practice because you have the excuse that you're too busy. So that is also a form of laziness.
It is not a joke of the mind when we always think that we are so busy, we don't find a time. It is a joke of the mind, a play.
Well, it's an avoidance of the mind. It's an avoidance, we make an excuse. We excuse ourselves. But I mean, if we really, really, really wanted to do something, we would do it. We would find the time. But because we don't want to really do it, because we maybe, again, we think, oh, it's too difficult. And I'm better at outer actions rather than sitting and just, looking at the breath or looking at the mind. And so again, it's just making an excuse not to look at the one thing. What is motivating all our actions is the mind, but the mind itself we are not looking at. So this is the problem. Then we don't ever, really go deeper. It remains on the surface of the ocean.
Jitsumna, my question number 7. You always insist on the importance of daily life as a meditative practice. And you say in page 41, if we don't use our daily life as a practice, nothing will ever change. The question is whether something inside us has really changed. My question, how can we use our daily life well as a practice? By observing ourselves continuously, by correcting our thoughts, etc., or by how?
Yeah, this is a huge subject, Lwiis. I mean, truly. But, first of all, it's good to have a basic formal practice, even 10 minutes a day where we just sit and practice formally. But also we have to use our daily life and our relationships as a way to cultivate a sense of presence, which is mindfulness, right? And also all these other qualities like kindness, ethics, generosity, patience, all these things, everybody we meet and everything which we do, if we can manage to try to cultivate awareness, being present, and at the same time cultivate the, this loving awareness, not just being aware, but with an open, kind heart. Then everybody we meet, even difficult people, are helping us, because difficult people are teaching us patience and forbearance, and people in need are teaching us generosity and sharing. During all our life, we should try to maintain ethical conduct and not harm anyone else. Our speech should be kind and truthful. I mean, our daily life is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for practicing all these qualities of the heart, so that gradually they become more and more spontaneous. And we realize that we are changing inside, where before we would get impatient or angry or frustrated. Now we don't feel like that anymore, that we feel, very centered and calm and kind and so forth. And we recognize the mind can change. Of course it can. Because really, Lwiis, the important thing to always remember is that our basic nature is beautiful. Our basic nature is love and wisdom and intelligence and light. This is who we really are. And that's what we are trying to get back to, is our true nature.
Jetsumna, I heard a lot of people in this period, they said, in this period of war, we cannot practice. What we should reply to them? Is it a true?
This is the time to practice. In the time of obstacles and of difficulties, this is exactly when we should be practicing. If we can only practice when everything, like fair weather practices, when the sun's shining and sky's blue, we'll practice. But as soon as there are storms, then we can't practice. That's no practice, right? We have to practice learning how to take all the difficulties and making that the path, right? By learning how to have compassion in the time of suffering, how to have patience in the time of aggravation, and all these qualities which we need to develop can only be developed in the face of difficulties and problems. I mean, if we're only happy and friendly and kind when everybody else is happy and friendly and kind, then that's not even a practice, right? So it's at the time when we are faced by all these all these difficulties around us and all these problems and all this aggression and anger, that's when we have to cultivate all the qualities. I sometimes say it's like going to gymnasium to get strong muscles. You have to work on the hard machines. You're not going to get strong muscles lying on the couch. I mean, people go on the treadmills and they're working away, sweat coming down, really, because they know that will transform flabby muscles into strong muscles. And so on the spiritual path, likewise, our challenges are what make us inwardly strong.
So obstacles are a part of the practice?
They are the practice.
They are the practice itself.
The obstacles are the opportunities for us to inwardly grow, to become strong, and to cultivate our compassion and our loving kindness under all conditions, not just when everything seems to be going nicely. Otherwise, what's the point?
Okay. Jetsumna, my question number 8, speaking of thoughts and the spaces that separate them, you give a concrete example and you say in page 50, you say in England, in the underground stations, there is a voice that repeats, mind the gap. Be aware of the space between the cars and the platform. Well, here too, it is essential to pay attention to the space between thoughts. My question, normally our thoughts are so fast that we don't realize that there is a space between them. What is this space? A simple void? And what is the point of being aware of this space?
Right, so exactly that. I mean, usually our thoughts are going so fast that we cannot see any space. Like a movie, with all the separate frames, they're going so fast, it looks like it's a real movie, like it's projecting out. But when we practice observing the thoughts, gradually, the thoughts themselves become slower and more calm, right? So then between a past thought, if we're really, really aware of the thoughts, they begin to slow down. And then between a past thought and a future thought, there's a gap. And in that gap, we can see the primordial nature of the mind. It's like clouds, you know, in the sky, thick clouds in the monsoon, all you see is clouds. But if you keep watching, then eventually maybe they begin to lighten up and then they part. And then suddenly we see the sky. And we realize the sky isn't clouds. The clouds come from the sky. The clouds go back into the sky. But behind the clouds, there is this vast, open, spacious blue sky, which we never knew was there before. And then, of course, the clouds close up again and we've lost it. But we know now that there is sky and that the sky does not just mean that there is clouds, right? So likewise, then we realize we are not the thoughts. These arise and they disappear within the space of primordial awareness. That's the important thing. And this primordial awareness is luminous. It's luminous but empty. It's not something you can grasp, like the sky, right? You can't grasp the sky, right? So then there's this state of pure knowing, right? There's non-dualistic consciousness beyond the subject and the object. Our ordinary thinking mind is very dualistic by its nature, but the space behind the thoughts, where the thoughts rise and cease, is this non-dualistic consciousness, which we all have. It's our true nature, but we don't recognize it. This is the problem. It's not that we have to develop it, it's that we don't see it. And one way of seeing it is by observing the thoughts and allowing the thoughts to, there's a gap, right? So that's why I made the joke about in the underground, it says, mind the gap. And that's what we have to do. We have to mind the gap. And then we realize that we are not this small, limited consciousness, but we're something infinite beyond time and space. This is really very important. And also that we are interconnected with all beings. I mean, our dualistic consciousness makes the separation. There's me, there's you, there's everything else. They're outside me. And we don't recognize what Thich Nhat Hanh called our interbeing, that we are all actually intimately connected, not just humans, but animals, birds, and the whole of nature. We're all very interconnected. And in that level of awareness, of consciousness, we realize that we just know. It's a state of pure knowing. And this is what we're trying to recognize and to, be able to at least access it whenever we wish to. And this is the problem, is that, the ego immediately grasps it. And then the ego is exactly the clouds.
Jetsumna, in the same context, you say in page 67, according to Buddhist psychology, we cannot have two thoughts at the same time. My question, what value can this reality have in helping us to recognize our minds?
Well, again, the more moments of mindfulness, the less moments of distraction, obviously, right? And as our minds become more calm and more clear, and our ability to stay present instead of being swept into the past or the future, and we are present and more poised increases, then our monkey minds become tamed, right? And we feel great inner happiness and a lightness and a sense of inner freedom. So therefore, we're no longer dominated by our negative emotions in the way that we normally are. And so the more thoughts of awareness, the less thoughts of distraction, right? That's why as our mindfulness, as our attention grows, automatically the discursive thinking gets slower and slower and slower, because we're having more moments of mindfulness, therefore less moments of distraction. So we don't have to stop our thinking. We don't have to do anything. All we have to do is cultivate our attention. Then automatically our thinking gets slower, more calm, and more clear.
Mhm. And our attention, how we can cultivate it practically?
Practically, we start usually by just breathing and knowing that we're breathing.
Mhm.
Because normally when we breathe, we're not conscious we're breathing. So the breath is an easier object of mindfulness at the beginning than our mind, because our mind is so quick, right?
Mm.
So we start by focusing on the breath, especially the out breath, just relaxed and knowing, I'm breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. It's very, very simple, very relaxed, just knowing the breath. The problem is that after one or two breaths, the mind is bored.
Yeah.
And zooms off, thinking much more exciting things. Yes. So then that's fine. Then as soon as we recognize we are lost, we come back again, right? And as we just keep doing that, then gradually we build up the habit of being attentive instead of being distracted, right? We're back to the drop by drop. Okay. So it needs, Lwiis, it needs patience and it needs perseverance. And that's why I say the short sessions are better at the beginning, because otherwise the mind gets very bored and then we're fighting the mind, which is not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is relax the mind and at the same time cultivate this ability to be aware, to know the breath as it comes in and out. And of course, in itself, that begins to calm the mind. If we bring our attention back to the breathing in, breathing out, the mind begins gradually, slowly to become more settled.
Jetsumna, 1 minute. Now, my question number 10, speaking of the great danger of identifying with thoughts, you say, page 50, actually, the mind itself is a wonderful thing because it gives us the ability to practice. Thoughts, on the other hand, are not a problem. It is the identification with thoughts that it is a problem, a real one. My question, this identification is probably everyone's problem, and it is the cause of fanaticism and ideologies. And what is most curious is that we don't realize it. We are deeply convinced that we are our thoughts. How do you think we can get out of it?
Well, you know, we learn not to identify with our thoughts by inwardly stepping back and observing the mental stream rather than being swept away by it. I mean, it's like being on, normally, if you think of the thoughts as like a river, then we are in the river, swept along by the river. So now we're going to step out of the river, and we're not going to dam up the river. We're not going to stop the river from flowing. But what we are going to do is sit on the bank and watch the river go by, right? So it will naturally become quiet, more quiet, as our ability to observe it deepens. As I say, the more moments of awareness or mindfulness, the less moments of discursive thinking. So as our mindfulness becomes stronger, then naturally the stream will get slower and slower. And this brings us back to, times when there may be, a gap between the past and the future thoughts. So, the point is that once we can observe the thoughts, then we recognize that we cannot be the thoughts because we can observe them.
Mhm.
But normally, because we're swept away by them, then we think we are, and not only that we think we are our thoughts, we believe our thoughts.
Mhm.
We think because we thinking this, it must be true. Our memories, we think our memories are real, but they're just thoughts, and seeing events from our point of view, which might be very distorted. It might not have been like that at all, but we believe it because that's what we're telling ourselves.
Mhm.
And likewise, our ideas, our opinions, our beliefs, all of it, we think these are real and these are true because that's what we're thinking.
Mhm.
When we can step back and just observe it, then we see they're just, mental impulses. They're just energy. It's not me, it's not mine. There's deeper levels of consciousness. This is just the surface of the ocean. It's not the whole ocean.
But Jitsumna, when we observe our thoughts, we observe them by our mind, no?
Yeah, but by a more subtle level of our consciousness. Consciousness has many levels. And normally we're living on the very gross level. But there are more subtle levels which are able to cultivate awareness and to observe.
Hmm.
We can do that, but normally we don't.
Mm-hmm. Jitsumna, my question number 11, speaking on the danger of the possessive mind, you quote the Buddha who said, page 53, our possessive mind is the main cause of our suffering. And my question, is this continual tendency to grab things and possess them the nature of our mind? It is the nature, and how to end it?
Well, no, the nature of our mind, the actual nature of the mind is beyond grasping. It's total release and liberation from the greedy, grasping mind, which is our ego, right? It's beyond the ego. So first we have to become aware of how our mind reacts to the input of the senses. We grasp it like what we see and hear and taste and touch, right? How the mind responds to that input, right? We grasp at a pleasant sensation. I like it, I want it. Mm-hmm. And we recoil, we feel aversion towards unpleasant sensations. I don't like it, I hate this, right? So in this way, that creates our greed and our aversion, which seems like almost automatic. When we see something we like, we grasp it. When we see something we don't like, we want to push it away, right? It seems almost automatic. And we're not aware that we're feeding this in our responses. So what we need to do is to become conscious when these responses arise. As soon as they arise, we see it, right? We simply note the greed or the aversion or whatever. If we can see it as in the moment of arising, we can let it go, right? We don't have to follow them and fuel them. Really, it's very important just to recognize them, accept them, and then release it. Mm-hmm. Then the mind is very open and free.
Jitsumna, mind and ego. Is mind is beyond ego, or it is something equal to the ego? They are two different things, or?
The ego is just a manipulation of the mind, of the brain, in order to help us to survive, really. And it's based on memories and our habitual responses to the input coming from the senses. but it's like the clouds which are covering the pure sky. You know, and our problem is that we identify with this ego. We think this is me and this is mine. Honestly, Lewis, in all genuine spiritual traditions, not just Buddhism, but also the great Christian mystics, the great Jewish mystics, and the Sufi mystics, and the Hindu mystics, everybody recognizes that what is covering over our true nature, whatever you can call it God, you can call it Dharmakaya, you can call it nature of the mind, you can call it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. That inner divine nature, which is our true nature, is covered over by this small self, by this ego. And all the great mystics have recognized that the problem is how to overcome the ego. And Buddhism recognizes that just beating it up doesn't get rid of the ego. It makes a very sad little ego, miserable little ego, sitting there, you know, like beating a child or beating a horse. They will be obedient, but they will not be happy, right? It doesn't get rid of the ego. So the thing is how do we get rid of the ego? By seeing through it, by having a healthy ego and then dissolving it through our insight into the true nature of the mind. And then we can use the ego if we need it, but we don't believe that it's in charge anymore.
But the mind in itself can go beyond ego, or we should.
Of course. Otherwise, what's the point? The whole point of the spiritual life is to go beyond the ego and to realize our true identity, which has nothing to do with the ego. The ego by its very nature is dualistic. Me, you, others, us, them. That's the cause of all this war and conflict. And that's our basic ignorance. The ego is totally ignorant. And that's why it has to be dissolved. And we have to recognize our true nature, which is wisdom and compassion.
Okay.
The good news is that that's who we really are, wisdom and compassion, and not this little deluded, self-cherishing ego. That's a fiction. It's not true. Okay. So that's good, right?
Zetsumna, my question number 12. Speaking on the ever-repeating human stupidity, you say in page 55, I sometimes say that this is the argument I use against karma and rebirth, when I see how people seem to have learned nothing from their previous lives. My question, this fact applies well on two levels, individual and collective, personal stupidity and wars, etc. As if neither man nor human societies have no memory. Is it also the nature of a human spirit not to profit from past mistakes, or it is a fatality?
Well, we shouldn't be too pessimistic. Of course, we can learn from our mistakes, but we seem to be very slow learners. As we said at the beginning of this talk, you know, we make the same mistakes again and again as people and as a nation, right? Why? Because the three poisons of our greed and our aversion and our basic ignorance are so deeply entrenched in our brain that we seem as if we're powerless to overcome them. But that is only because we are not applying the correct antidotes to these poisons, right? So if we just keep increasing the poisons, then of course we're always going to be making the same mistakes again and again and again. So above all, to learn how to be more aware of what is happening in our mind. That's the essence. We're so often focused on outside and what's happening on the outside, or we're caught up in our thoughts and our memories and our feelings, and we don't really know what's going on. So this is why awareness and mindfulness is so important, to begin to understand how the mind is functioning. And when these negative emotions are coming up, to recognize them. And when we can recognize them, then we have the opportunity to transform them into the positive, the negative into the positive, because the positive is our true nature. These negative emotions like the anger and greed and so forth, these are not our true nature. They're like the pollution around a silver pot. They're not the pot.
Jetsuna, but this doubt about rebirth and karma, I have the same when I look and there is 6 billions of people in the earth, and from this 6 billion there is maybe not 6 person who is enlightened and who get nirvana. So how all these billions of people can one day catch and arrive to realizations?
Well, we hope. We hope we have enough time to transform. It's true. I mean, you know, all these centuries and enlightened beings who have come through the centuries to try to teach us and help us. And we are very slow learners. It's true. It's true. But nonetheless, we should not give up hope, because our true nature is good. And all we need to do is uncover that. And then there it is, right? However much deeply immersed we have been in ignorance, in a finger snap, we can transform. So let's keep praying for that.
It can be in quickly or in...
It could be, if the potential is there. Because it's our true nature, which is what we need to recognize. It's not that we have to create something which isn't already there. What we have to do is see it. But like the sky. The sky is always there. It's not we have to create the sky. But we don't recognize it.
Realization, it's a personal, only a personal fact, or it can be a social fact, common fact.
Well, it could influence others. I mean, there are times in history when people seem to get the idea better than other times. You know, I mean, like during the time of the Buddha, so many people were getting liberated and realizing nirvana, presumably partly because they had the good karma to meet with the Buddha, but also because of his influence, you know. So, I mean, there are times when, you know, people seem to be more spiritually activated than other times. Nowadays, so many people, on the other good side, is that, you know, nowadays people are practicing mindfulness and they're practicing meditation. They're talking about compassion in a way that, you know, even 10, 20 years ago, people weren't talking like that. You know, anybody who did meditation was considered weird. Nowadays, you know, even they give meditation courses in big, you know, businesses like Google, etc. I mean, it's become standard, maybe in order to reduce stress and lower your cholesterol, but nonetheless, people are doing it, you know, even if they're not doing it in order to become liberated. But if it helps the mind, and if they makes their lives easier and happier, then it's a good thing.
Okay. Jetsumna, question number 13. You often repeat the Tibetan aphorism, which says in page 62, practice with words in everything you do. My question about this aphorism, does this mean use some kind of mantras in meditation and in daily life? Practice with words?
I mean, honestly, I don't recognize that aphorism. However, nonetheless, even though I don't know where that came from, in fact, we can practice. Sometimes it's very skillful to practice, like the Jesus prayer, you know, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner. Just repeating that again and again and again. The Tibetans repeat Om Mani Padme Hum, which is the mantra for compassion. And if we keep it going in our mind, silently but continuously, then this does actually calm the mind and create an inner space. I mean, I myself have experienced that, but we have to keep it going. You know, everything we're doing in the background is this prayer or this mantra just reverberating. Then gradually of itself, it begins to go from the head down into the heart, and it becomes spontaneous. We don't have to make any effort. And then that creates the space between the thoughts and the space in which the mantra or the prayer is revolving, and then the awareness of that. So this actually can be a very, very skillful practice, even in everyday life. You know, when you're working, you can still have this short prayer or mantra working inside you. It does work.
So words and mantras had a power in itself to
Yeah, I think so. I think so. They have their own blessing.
By the meaning of this mantra, or by just the vibration?
I think just the repetition and the trust in it. Not, you know, I mean, most Tibetans wouldn't know what Om Mani Padme Hum means. But it doesn't matter, because they have faith in it and they know it is the mantra for compassion. So of itself, it has its own power. Also because generations and generations of people have recited the mantra or the prayer, and therefore, it, like the Jesus prayer or any of that, it has its own power to transform.
And these generations who repeated this mantra give to this mantra some power, some additional power.
So it's I mean, you know, it's a transmission. I mean, I don't know if you said on Coca-Cola Hum Pe, on Coca-Cola Hum Pe, on Coca-Cola Hum Pe, if that would have the same result. I doubt it, because it has a different vibration from saying Om Mani Padme Hum.
We can charge these mantras by power by repeating it.
Well, it does it of itself. We have what we do is, in the beginning, to make a conscious decision to keep this reciting. But after a while, it gains its own momentum, and the blessings of that mantra take over. So as I say, it slips from the head, where we're consciously reciting, and just of itself spontaneously is like in the center of our being, reverberating without our having to do anything. It's just there. We don't have to make any effort anymore. In the beginning, we make effort, but in the end, it becomes effortless.
So this
vibration, so that I think is the power of that prayer or that mantra, that it does that. But in the beginning, we have to give it our own, you know, attention.
Okay. Yetsumna, question number 14. Speaking of the importance of changing feelings you teach, in page 64, we can, for example, replace sensual desire with goodness. Neutral feelings can be replaced by feelings of equanimity. It is very important to act constantly in this direction. My question, how can sensual desire be practically replaced by goodness? And what is the difference between neutrality and equanimity?
Okay, so obviously we can replace negative emotions with positive emotions. Definitely we can, but not by suppressing them, not by pretending I don't feel greedy or I don't feel angry, you know. We have to recognize when an afflictive emotion arises, then we have the choice to feed it or to transform it, right? Usually we are swept along by an emotion and we are deeply immersed before we recognize what's happening. But we can look at this emotion and let it go. We do have a choice. That's why we're learning to tame the mind and transform the mind. So eventually we transform and transcend the conventional mind. So, I mean, equanimity means a balanced mind, right? Like a well-strung instrument, not too tight and not too loose. So this ability to balance and not fall into extremes in our thinking. It's not indifference. It's just a state of balance. So this we can do, you know, we can all, and to develop what I call a Teflon mind, a mind which is a non-stick mind. You know, the mind doesn't grasp or it doesn't push away. It just sees things as they are without being so deeply influenced anymore. The problem is normally we are not aware what's going on in the mind until we're carried away by it.
Mhm.
This is why mindfulness is so important.
Mhm.
So that we are there, right present in that moment, and we can see how we are responding to the various stimuli which come into the brain. And it's just not, you know, just an automatic reaction, but we have a choice how we will respond.
Mhm. But in fact, what is the difference between equanimity and neutrality?
Well, I mean, as I say, equanimity means that we're balanced. We're not, you know, totally attached to what for example, with people, that we're not attached only to the people we like and we're angry towards people that we don't like, but that we have that ability to keep a balanced mind. Mm-hmm. Normally, we're always falling into extremes, right? This is why we get wars, right? Our side versus your side. Your side is all bad, our side is all good. That's the opposite of equanimity, that ability to just see things clearly how they really are without grasping or aversion.
Okay.
And then the mind stays quiet, you know, it just sees things, how they come up, and then we can just release them without grasping. It's our grasping mind which causes so many problems.
So we should be neutral, equanimous with our thoughts when, even in meditation, when there came so many emotions.
Yeah, we just watch them, you know, they're like black clouds, white clouds, they're just clouds. They're not the sky.
Okay. Jetsumna, my last question, number 15. On human nature, you tell a significant story, page 67. You said a person who comes to consult a psychiatrist says, anger is my second nature. The psychiatrist retorts, fine, but what is your first nature? And my question, what is our first nature? And why do these negative emotions become a kind of second nature?
Right, that's a very good question. That's a very good question. So our first nature, right, our true nature, is this primordial, non-dual awareness, which is luminous clarity, right? It's a state of knowing without a knower, right? Without the sense of I know. There is just this complete open knowing quality of the mind, right? So it's like a state of waking up from a dream of our ignorance, and is the fullness of our wisdom and compassion. It is light, love, intelligence. That's our true nature. That's who we really are, but we don't know it, right? So like weeds in the garden, right? Our negative emotions, especially based on our ignorant ego consciousness, right? They just flourish, right? And they are especially generated by our habit of greed towards what we like, and aversion and jealousy and pride and all this based on the ignorance of our clinging to the ego, right? So these are called, in English, they're called adventitious defilements. Adventitious means they're not inherent, as I said, it's like, without getting, too caught up in it, it's like if we look at ourselves as the nature of the mind is like a silver or gold pot, then silver, if we don't polish it, it gets all black, right? The black, and then when we look, all we see is the blackness, the tarnish. But that tarnish, however thick it may be, if we polish it and remove it, it hasn't affected the silver of the pot. The pot is still very silver. It never gets tarnished. The tarnish is outside, right? It's not inherent to the silver of the pot. It's not that our nature of mind is the silver pot, but it's that it's completely pure. And however messed up we may be on our conscious level, it never affects the purity of our inherent nature. This is really, really very important. So, so if we clear away the tarnish, right, then the silver is shining. So our first nature is wholly beautiful and pure, right? That's our true nature, what we call the Buddha nature, right? And so no matter what we do, however messed up we may be on the surface of the mind, that never affects the depths of our true nature. That can never be affected. And that's why we can be liberated, because we are not these defilements. That's all part of the ego. When the ego dissolves, then those negative emotions dissolve with it. They're supported by our ignorance.
Okay.
So don't worry, we all have our first nature, and that's who we truly are.
Yeah, it is a very optimistic end, and we ended this 10th interview. And good news for all that Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo accepted to be with us for more 2 interviews to finish her 3rd book on also analyzes the message in this book. Today it was really a good interview, enough in 1 hour and a half, 1 hour and a half, and all questions were answered. So we hope that we will also meet you for another 2 interviews, as you accepted to be with us. Maybe Dr. Jack Vini has something to say before ending this interview with Jetsumna. Jacques, are you there?
Yes, I am in airport in La Réunion, and so it was nice to be directly connected with all of you. And in spite of some noise around, I could follow, and so I will listen more quietly without the outer noise, thanks to the recording. Recording is very precious in that case. And so this real nature is really what lacks in Western psychology, basically, because one speaks always of sufferings, but coming back to the real nature is not that much developed. Some schools now they do it, but it's lack on the. So we are lost in the maze of sufferings. And there is not this reconnection, which is typical in spiritual life and in spiritual path. So too many details, too many sufferings, and it becomes very complicated. And there is not this impulse of direct connection. So this is what can bring a spiritual life, and especially Tibetan Buddhism or non-dual thinking.
Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo, thanks a lot, and we'll see you in December, I think.
Okay, we'll arrange it. Thank you, Lwiis. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Happy.
Thanks.